have on the desk.
Oh, Lord, there's a bunch of these.
Yeah, I know. That's been waiting for us, I think.
Any kind of
You're not
coaching
gonna sign?
Just make sure you keep the mics.
And I just listened to a 2017 council meeting video, so I realize how difficult it is to hear council members if you're any distance from it.
Mhm.
No, that's you. Yeah, sorry.
And so
I guess
tonight,
it could be
just so
either.
for the study session, we'll start at 6, and we'll have, people can attend by Zoom or they can be here.
Mhm.
And we're also streaming on YouTube. And then whenever that finishes, we'll break, and then we'll actually, the 7 o'clock meeting will start. And that will be run through ECTV plus Zoom and also YouTube. So you're going to see the folks that are watching on Zoom are going to see the panel of you all up on the Zoom screen.
We can see that there.
And you can see that there, if we can get that television going. People can attend remotely, and so, Drew, have we turned the hands? Raise hand off, okay. So, Mayor, you won't be able to see during the study session, anybody raise their hand.
Yeah, remote.
Yeah, so, but during the council meeting, it'll just be like you're on a Zoom screen. The mayor can take testimony remotely or in person. We have told people, so the rules essentially are that if you're fully vaccinated, you can be unmasked in a room. We don't have
I know how to
capacity
explain
limits. We offer just for extra space if people want, if they're more comfortable to have a little more space. If people come in vaccinated and are presenting, you have distance over here, and so you can allow folks to take off their mask while they're at the diet, or at the podium, if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, well,
So
it
we can-
seems reasonable to me. We're in the honor system, right?
Exactly. One big trust. IT folks here.
Why? Because there's more property.
Because isn't this Jim? Oh. So I should probably, I can just go to my desk. Hardly recognize me.
Yeah, he's gotten older.
It is on, yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's only that. He made a vow not to shave until COVID was over. Oh, my God.
But when is it over? Really,
Yeah.
right? I don't know.
It's over.
When is it over?
I think June 30th, it was over.
Well, except for the people who are dying.
Yeah.
That's not over for them.
If they don't want to get the shot, choice.
Hasn't just like the kids who want access.
But it also doesn't, I'm scared that. So if they want swing days, we're not gonna have that.
I've got it. Yeah, I've got it. Yeah.
Tonight.
Tonight?
Tonight.
Good for you.
I had to make a choice.
It's a great schedule.
I guess I didn't realize it until like last week. And I was trying. Yeah, yeah. I didn't either. Well, let's see, the school district.
So they're not gonna have the two incumbents.
Well, Nancy's not in the primary, so.
No, but I mean, the two that are challenged.
Yes.
Oh, no, the only one is challenged. You.
Right.
And then the
Barbara's
rest are
right.
both. You're not. So, okay.
So they're really.
You're responsible.
Well, no, that's why.
It's separate.
I didn't do separate. Unless we mess with it, then.
I'm granted. It is, okay. David, tell me your address again.
011. East Second. North side.
I can't remember what I did. I called my insurance agent to see, I mean, I'm cut, I've got a policy that. They won't cover it.
Probably George was right when George, one year got in the parade.
Is that red Corvette, but that's his new right?
It's Terry's car. It's a Terry insists it's a Corvair, but you know, we'll have to go see.
Is it Terry's car?
He knows about it.
Terry's
So.
red car?
Oh, a Corvair.
You wanna drive me in the rodeo parade?
You have to walk in the rodeo parade.
I saw,
Part of the rules.
well, I saw somebody riding a bicycle once. That was a council candidate. Maybe even twice.
Right now, and he goes, no. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Don't you have other thoroughfares? And he was like, no, we have Bender and Airport and with those.
And they have never acknowledged.
Okay, so have we called the other monitor?
You can always just sit like this, see the backs of somebody.
It's one.
But I'm out of the picture.
Well, yeah, yeah. Okay, let's get this thing going, I guess. Or certainly try. I'd like to welcome everybody. This is a special session of the Ellensburg City Council for the evening of July 6th, 2021. Our special session will focus on economic development and potential strategies. Prior to beginning, if the clerk would call the roll for this session.
Engel. Here. Goodlow. Here. Lilquist. Here. Miller.
Here.
Morgan. Here. Town.
And here, Councilmember Lamb has requested an excuse.
Second?
So a motion and second for an excused absence for Councilmember Lamb for the special. And we'll have to do that again when we get to our regular meeting. So, all those in favor?
Aye.
I too vote aye, that motion carries. Thank you. How do we want to lead off this conversation? Do we have a staff report?
The city manager is unlocking the door.
That's not a guess.
That's just Rich.
So there's a pregnant pause here as, you're sitting where people are not vaccinated. I would,
That's a quarantine area over there. I can report that the sale of the incubator building did close. Those funds will be actually deposited tomorrow, roughly a little over $706,000. So those will be set aside for now pending council direction.
Yippee skippy. No more money.
So we were just kind of, we got an update from Terry on closing of the building and the funds would be distributed. Did you want to do a staff report to start the conversation or?
We can certainly do a staff report pretty quickly to start the conversation. And thank you, Mayor and Council, Heidi Barron Sternaway, your city manager. So before, let's see here. Relevant to the discussion. So last week, on June 28th, we had a study session to talk about options moving forward for use of the funds from the proceeds for the sale of the incubator. Again, it was a 31-plus-year-old building constructed to be the city's incubator in, let's see here. With the packet in for the study session, Centrifuge provided some information on economic development and their work plan. And then also we sent out some sample ideas of what some programs that Centrifuge potentially could propose to use for the use of the funds. Really the discussion has been around directing staff to talk, to look at goals, processes and procedures for use of these funds. And we left the study session last time and provided actually some information on the TIP strategy. So in 2009, there's a countywide economic development plan that was put forth. And so there was some discussion about, we have one-time use of funds available, about $700,000. And best practice is generally spending one-time dollars on one-time projects. And so thinking through a strategy. And so there's some support expressed in looking at potential use of some of these dollars toward an economic development strategy, potentially working with the county. And so the idea was sent out and the 2009 plan was sent out as a discussion point.
Thank you. And I just to frame that a little bit further, there was also a scope of work that was set as well as the plan. There have been conversations that David and I have taken part of about re-energizing and revisiting the 2009 plan to update. And the conversation around cost sharing with the scope of work has primarily focused on the city of Ellensburg and the county sharing the cost. From the conversations that we've had with the county, the thought was that we would have really, from my perspective, purchased a potential seat at the table, been able to, if we move forward with the recommendation for the plan, be able to guide the plan to specifically meet areas of concern, issue, and opportunities specifically for the city. And that we were asking the smaller communities, particularly Roslyn, Clay Ellen, and Kittitas, for their councils to agree to participate actively and commit to the plan, but not to provide financial support for the plan. Also, I want to just be clear, the scope of work, just so we're clear, just in case anybody did come to me, it was it's addressed to me as the mayor. It was a conversation really that we had initiated with the county. The county's participated in all the conversations that we've had with TIP. I had the initial relationship with the individual who did the 2009 plan and had done the initial outreach to TIP. So as we went through the conversations, because of that relationship, this came to me, but I don't want it to imply at any level that I either that there was any kind of commitment that we had made other than building on a relationship that occurred 11 years ago. And then reconnecting and having the conversations that led to the scope of work that's in front of us. So,
What is the financial obligation that we're discussing?
so there's two phases to the plan, or to the scope of work. I think the initial is 70,000, so it's 140,000 total.
150 is what I said.
Or 140, whatever it is. It's
75 for phase one.
Yeah, so it's 150. We would cost share 50%. Yeah.
So my question is this, why, what benefit does the city get out of cost sharing with the county to the benefit of Kittitas, Roslyn, Cleveland, South Cleveland, et cetera? Why not just spend 75,000 and get a study done for the city?
Because I think that, because my experience of economic development is economic development, because the city is a small player in a huge world. And I think that if we collaborate and build partnerships with the county and our smaller communities, we stand stronger and are in a better market position ultimately to move forward. I also would suggest if you did review the plan that was done in 2009, quite a bit of the activities that were not realized that we did, again, I'm not going to argue whether we got there or not. We're very, very specific to the city. There was quite a bit there that spoke to partnering with CWU. There was quite a bit to talk about partnering with students, as well as the supporting, which now actually exists, their entrepreneurial efforts. There was talk about recruiting professional sector, which was actually, while it's generic, the conversations at that time were specific and based on gaps that were identified within the city of Ellensburg in professional services. There was an entire sector on renewable energy, which was driven really by the conversation at that time because of what the city had moved forward with our solar park, and felt that we were well positioned to do that. There's suggestions in that plan that spoke to developing a venture capital fund, which is something that we've talked about within the PDA, within Centrifuge, because there's actually an RCW that allows for crowdfunding. And so again, there's a level there where a number of areas that if you were to review it from a perspective of the city of Ellensburg relative to the rest of the county, from my perspective, the 2009 plan created quite a number of paths that we could have picked up, or Centrifuge could have picked up, prioritized, and if we had actualized, we would be in a better position now as a community in terms of our position within the economic development world. I've also always taken, this is just me, but whether it's the rural sales tax money or whatever, but I feel as if we are the largest community. And I think in certain ways, for instance, rural sales tax, there's been a conversation historically that a disproportionate amount of the rural sales tax money, the 0.09 distress sales tax money, has gone to smaller communities. From my perspective, that's not a negative. That to me is a positive. If Kittitas, if Roslyn's sewer systems are working, if Cleone's Main Street has adequate infrastructure for growth, then we all benefit. So I mean, to your point, so on a variety of levels, to me, it has always made sense to attempt to build partnerships and collaboration throughout the county, recognizing that we have an obligation to our community, and I feel like by committing actual dollars, we have the capacity to come back on the scope of work and shape that in a way that if needed, it more demonstrably is targeted towards specific activities within the city of Ellensburg. And if we don't, then we lose that opportunity. that,
So in my experience on COG, which was several years, I felt that projects were funded at times through COG, and I expressed that difference of opinion with them, that did not meet the guidelines, that were funded to placate unhappy communities. And the city was asking for funding for things like extending the fiber optic network, and we were shot down. We were shot down on numerous projects, not all of them, but I'm saying a lot of them. We were shot down when they would have been of benefit to the entire area. And I, you know, you're saying that that it benefits them. I agree. Fixing Roslyn's flooding problem was critical. I would have funded it the first time it came up and just said, let's fix the whole thing and be done with it, instead of doing it piecemeal like we did. But that doesn't take away the fact that Cleellen and Kittitas, percentage-wise, have taken a huge amount of money out of COG that, you know, we are the largest community. I understand that, but we also are not a big town, and we still need help. And even the small amounts, relatively small amounts we've asked for, we've had trouble getting.
I appreciate that. The conversation, and none of the money that at this point for this study would be coming from, at least my understanding would be coming from the rural sales tax fund. So
I'm not talking about that money.
well, but I'm suggesting the projects that would be funded through COG are projects that are funded through the rural sales tax. This is not. So our applications for our fiber network have been funded through the rural sales tax. This project specifically actually is a different, part of this is to attempt to establish a different relationship with COG than they have historically played in the county. Be more actively engaged in the conversation around economic development and invested at least a council level to overseeing and supporting the economic development efforts that occur within the county. The money, I believe, and I don't, you know, I can't speak for the county specifically. I mean, the pot of dollars that we've got to the city managers is money that is one-off money from the sale of from the incubator building that we have specifically targeted for economic development. And part of my concern, I think, and I know I'm talking too much, you know, is that we have had a report, an overview, and potential projects floated by centrifuge that, from my perspective, have no metrics, there's no data, there's no grounds for or rationale for the level of investment that they're asking. And from my perspective, particularly looking back over what we were providing in 2009, and assuming that they may have changed some of the formatting by now, or you know, maybe they're using red for priority instead of 3 bars. But from my perspective, it's an opportunity to establish both baseline and potential metrics, and we have none of that right now. You know, what it feels like we have is sort of anecdotal. Oh, this seems like a good idea. And then as council, when we asked, okay, it seems like a good idea, what tie this to economic development? I can't, and I know we've not had a detailed conversation, but I can't put my finger on one quantifiable outcome for a level of investment in the proposals that have come before us. And I feel like this could at least start us in that direction.
So, go ahead, I was gonna say.
So what I'm hearing is you think that the TIP and update of the TIP strategy would provide us with some clear guidance or that we could measure any proposals that came forward for this $700,000. And could also provide guidelines, I guess, for the COG rural development money, the .09 money.
Well, actually, I think it could. I mean, that's a great, I hadn't framed it that way, but I think it could, actually.
So what I was hoping to get out of tonight was not the metrics specifically, but the process for which we would go through to spend that money. I think that in our study session, there was a series of questions, who can access the funds, what would it pay for, and kind of the how would we get there, the how would we judge any proposals that came forward. And I guess I'm okay moving forward with a TIP strategy and using that as one measure of what we would, how we would judge. So just, is it consistent with the TIP plan? But it also has to be consistent with our comprehensive plan. And I don't think that that's enough. I think that we need some other measures, and potentially TIP defined economic development as the use of public resources to stimulate private investment. So I don't know if we can measure what is what's the potential for stimulating private investment with any of the proposals that come to us. So those would be the three measures, but I also would like to make sure we get to the who can apply and what are we funding. I think that we could agree we're going to fund infrastructure kinds of projects, and I'm fine with planning kinds of things. Studies, databases that we can use, which admittedly, linking that to how well you stimulate private investment is nebulous, maybe. But, yeah, so I don't know if we can direct our conversation to answering those questions that were posed at our study session. The who, what, how, and I'm not sure what the other questions were.
Yeah, I had a couple points I wanted to make.
Yeah.
I think I like the idea of funding the study with the money for a couple reasons. It has been really nice for me when I'm making decisions in this chair to have a long-term view. And we have that for other departments. We have that for finance, we have that in public works, we have, all these things that we can say, yes, this is moving us forward in our bigger picture plan. And so it's really easy to judge. And I feel like I've lacked that long-term vision when it comes to economic development. And so sometimes the projects that have come in front of us requesting for funding, it's been hard to judge, and it does feel a little bit like just random, we're doing all these things separately, and will they come together and move us forward? I'm not sure. So I think the study would be really helpful to create that framework for the long-term vision to then evaluate whether it's internal funding or granting money to other entities. Is it moving us in the direction that we want for economic development? So I would support this. I think that the study could also be really helpful in providing us something, in our comprehensive plan, when we do our community grants, we say, call out the exact goals that you're meeting. And I think that the study might help us create a document like that we could use for grant funding towards economic development. Like, are you meeting these areas? This is what we deemed is important long-term. So I see us using kind of a grading or a scoring criteria similar to how we've done that, but we kind of need the goals and visions first to be able to then align, is what you're asking for, align with what we want long-term. My biggest concern with this particular study is I have lacked the understanding of who the point person is, because the 7 of us could or could not be experts in economic development. And there's change there, and we don't have an economic development director in-house. And if we're splitting with the county on this, I have concerns that what happened before is gonna happen again. And I also know that, I mean, Centrifuge is kind of playing that role for us, but they're also a volunteer group. So who's the in-house expert on economic development that's driving this? And whenever we've hired outside consultants before, we have, you know, the director of planning help us with consultants for the housing action plan. Like, we've always had someone on staff teamed up. And that has helped move agenda items forward. So I would say that's my biggest concern and question in moving forward with both the study and economic development projects and funding projects in the future is, where is that onus? And who's driving that action plan?
So I can respond to a couple of them.
Can't hear you.
You have to lean forward.
Right. See what happens? And I got shoes on and pants, folks.
For a change.
For a change.
TMI.
I think that the issue in terms of ultimately who coordinates and how we actualize the plan is the critical question. And the conversations that there have been, so two things. I think in terms of overseeing the initial study, I think that again is part of what we're asking COG to be able to be actively engaged in. You know, there's a county commissioner on COG, and then myself and David for the city. And so we're not going to pretend to be economic development experts, honestly, but we are hiring economic development experts, and hopefully the voices that are around the table at COG represent the different communities in ways that are sufficient to guide the process and ensure that the consultants are connecting with stakeholders and individuals that are critical informants in giving us something that's doable or meaningful. So I think that piece of it, I'm comfortable saying, you know, that's, if I were looking at it in terms of engagement, to me, that's that piece that shifts the COG from every 2 years or whatever in God's name it is we do, we sit around and argue population characteristics and population demographics and, you know, what our growth rate's going to be, and then are told by the consultant that you really can't really alter the growth rate anyway because OFM establishes it, and if OFM establishes it, the only way that you get to change it is if you can provide additional dollars to the consultant so they can build the case with OFM. So we do that on a biennial or whatever it is basis, and it's a nice exercise to go through. You know, and then we do the rural sales tax stuff. You know, so again, to me, this is a shift in asking COG, and COG, I think, and David could speak to it, I think they're excited about the potential process, and I think they're willing to come to the table to have that conversation. I think that's huge in terms of communication within the county and potential partnerships and collaboration. We've never had that. So that piece of it I'm comfortable with. There have been conversations with the county that we've initiated, and again, I can't speak for the county and I can't speak for their resources, that would potentially create a position that would be, could provide that oversight, more of a coordination, economic development, not an economic development manager, but really a coordinator, so that you would hold people accountable for what they've committed to doing, and then potentially shepherd the process forward. Part of the negotiation that occurred with TIP was the addition of a 3-month, 6-month, and 1-year follow-up. The initial proposal did not include that. And there was really quite a bit of, I was quite concerned that we would be exactly where, to your point, where we were 11 years ago. So here's your plan, pat yourself on the back, you know, you're doing really good, and continue to do good work, and, you know, call us in 11 years and we'll see where you guys landed. Both the Commissioner Wright and myself then went back to them and said, we've got to hold at least some level of accountability and put that on the table so people recognize and understand that if you commit to doing it and the plan's accepted, in 3 months, you're going to sit around the table or sit in front of a screen or whatever it might be and explain why you didn't accomplish what you did. And it's also a plan, do, check, act. I mean, that's, you know, that's a traditional, I mean, David, you do planning and stuff. You know, part of what you end up doing with that is you do want the 3-month check-in, because what you did when you did the plan, something might have changed, and you need to alter and recognize and understand that. By the same token, you do the same thing at 6 months. The 1 year is envisioned as a countywide, everyone, the stakeholders all come together and they facilitate a conversation of what we've accomplished and what we've not accomplished, why we've not accomplished what we did, and what are our successes. So we felt in that conversation that that was absolutely a critical element. I mean, again, because I feel like that coordination piece, to your point, is critical. And it is what we had hoped to achieve back in 2009 by consolidating economic development under the rubric of the chamber. And it didn't work, flat out. I mean, you know, to your point, when we were doing the other one, you know, that plan for all intents and purposes, other than consolidation of economic development, got put up on a shelf. Nobody wanted to revisit it, nobody wanted to talk about it, and nobody held anybody accountable. And if we allow that to happen, again, then it will. But I think there's a shot here to do it differently. And I think this conversation, I've got to tell you, this conversation is different than we had in 2009. I don't recall any conversation, I wasn't on council either, but I don't recall a conversation at this level or this depth, exploring council's perception of the need, the desires of the council to see Ellensburg-centric sorts of things incorporated into the plan. None of that, I believe, occurred in 2009. So to me, we're setting a different stage even to launch the effort.
It seems to me that, I'm thinking about some of the comments Councilmember Lilquist made. And one of the things that I've been thinking about ever since we had our meeting, we don't have a definition of economic development for the city. And TIP has provided one.
Well, we do have an economic development chapter in a comp plan. There's an outline there with certain steps. So
Okay.
And there is, they don't say, and this is the definition of economic development, but, as I recall, I did read it in preparation for this meeting, but it was more along the lines of actions which lead to prosperity for the community, but that's pretty general.
And Centrifuge has brought up in their last meeting that they're gonna submit amendments for that section. It may need to be updated, and I imagine through this study, the TIP study, we would also probably update sections.
Well, and ideally, if they're going to submit amendments, we would be able to have a conversation about the amendments as the plan is being developed.
So if we spend some time talking in terms of goals and what we hope to accomplish, that would be a part of the TIP process as they do their work to outline specific things.
Yeah, I mean, if you looked at the executive summary and their overview, spoke to that to some extent in the previous plan.
Well, I'm glad to know that there were specific things to Ellensburg. In the first plan, I tend to agree with Mary, they were not real specific. And so you had to assume that Ellensburg would do that. So it would be helpful if those were more specific.
And I think we can incorporate that in whatever MOU, or whatever the framework, if we're moving forward with it, whatever the framework is, I think can be incorporated as part of the negotiation. David, did you want to?
Just to add, I think the key words, everyone's kind of on the same page. I think coordination, better coordination, and also responsibility by participants at countywide. I think sort of establish the local responsibilities, and that would include all the municipalities along with the county, but also not only to implement the program, but to actually work on its update. I mean, and I went back through the old plan, and one of the things that stood out to me was the fact that if you look at the introduction with all the acknowledgements of the players, we've got all entirely new people, right? Almost, I mean, it's a high percentage of people whose names are on that plan locally who are no longer here. You know, it's whether it's university or city or around. So organizations too, right? And to the other point, and I agree with the value that the strategy should be all inclusive, because I think consistency and coordination is going to yield better results countywide and also for the city. But I think as we negotiate or try to carve out, and, as has been said, we account for half the county's population. We probably, I think you can it's not hard to make an argument that we bear a higher percentage, if you will, of responsibility than smaller communities. But I think the other thing about it is that I agree with Councilmember Engel's comment. We've had some conversations about this over the last few weeks about, it was 3, 4, 5 years ago, we had a lot of conversations about how the city was going to coordinate its economic development activities. And we had some sort of conversations about, well, gee, we could hire an economic development director and it would cost this much, or, and sometimes that got sort of mashed together with the conversations about funding, economic development tourism through the chamber. That was sort of, is it good, best use of public resources to continue to contract that out or bring that in? And I think as far as tourism, visitor, and economic development, that side of it, I feel like that's pretty well in hand, but we don't have a good broader strategy. The other point too, that I think my takeaway, and I think it aligns with some of the comments made earlier about the proposals that Centerpiece provided, is I think we have to, before we launch into this, we kind of, as a city council, I think we have to make a decision or a conclusion whether Centerpiece is our economic development arm or not, right? I mean, are they there on our behalf? And I think the general answer is yes. That's why they're chartered by the city. But to that point, I think they need to be fully integrated in the process, not just reviewing, but participating in developing it. And then, so it's that same thing that you expect every municipality around everyone to buy in. Centerpiece has to be part of this if they're going to be anything, right? So they're going to be responsible on some level for implementation based on, the way things are structured now. So I think one, to your point, Councilmember Engel, I think, yeah, they have a volunteer board, but they have an executive director, right? So I think that we would expect them to take that role. This would be something, I think, tangible that they could take and run with. And I would expect that by participating in this process in a meaningful way, that might help them formulate some priorities. We get a lot of ideas that are floating around. They're all individually on their face reasonable, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of coordination, right? Or to the mayor's point, detail, data. So my preference would be to participate in the study at the rate that's been discussed. And I would prefer that we table any applications on funding other projects until we get through this process. I don't see that it does us a lot of good to whittle down this one-time pile of cash on little one-offs when we don't yet have our refined strategy at hand. So in my mind, I think we could do this in 2 steps. So that's what I would like to see.
Mary, did you want to?
I'm trying to understand, so you're saying that you and David are the voice of city council to COG to iron out this plan, and that's it. So you two are going to do the decision-making with Corey Wright.
Actually, that's not what we're saying.
You keep saying we, and I don't,
if I may,
obviously.
if I may, my understanding of what we're doing here today is providing direction for staff so that they can come back to us with whatever that framing or whatever that contract or MOU or interlocal or whatever we want to call it, so that council would then have the opportunity to review fundamentally what we're committing to, what we believe our outcomes are desired, and then modify that if it doesn't meet council's muster. And then we would take that back and further work with the county primarily, because that's where the interlocal is going to need to sign for the money. But so no, we're not. I think what I'm suggesting is that COG and with David and I would be involved with conversations with the next step of what this looks like. And that, but it always will come back to council, because we're not authorized at any level to enter into a contract that would commit the money. We can simply indicate that we've directed that we're willing to, out of this meeting, I believe we could come out of it, to David's point, with two steps, and then I want to get back to Nancy's. One would be that the council is willing to commit the $70,000, $75,000 to the study. And that secondly, that there would be no further activity or actions taken on the addition of 700,000 until such time as that study is completed and reviewed and accepted by council.
What's the time frame?
I think we were talking September, October. I mean, I can go back and review it. They did a pretty focused. Anyway, Mary, I don't know if that addresses exactly the concern, but we're not at any level, other than contributing this conversation to the conversation at COG and then ultimately with the commissioners. But anything that we would enter into ultimately comes back to council.
And to that point, I would reiterate that my expectation is that unless council says otherwise, that centrifuge has to be a key player at the table. So as far as input and expectations, I think it may require that we have another conversation with centrifuge, with the director of the board, to make sure that we, the council and centrifuge, are on the same page. But from my perspective, if we have council representation involved in the project and we have our economic development arm involved, we should have a fair amount of control over the direction or the emphasis points. That's the way I'd see it.
And I think that that's an important point. I was just kind of mulling over to Stacy's accountability, who's responsible for implementing. And it has been our, we think of Centrifuge as our economic development arm, but the executive director is accountable to a separate unelected board and not to this council. And there is sometimes a disconnect. And so we need perhaps more frequent interaction to get on the same page.
Well, I think we ultimately, we may need some legal review. My recollection when we separated more cleanly was that the RCW dictated an arm's length relationship between the municipality and the PDA.
Well, what does that doesn't mean we can't talk. Right?
No. But to the point of how you establish the priorities and how, who's to your who.
Right.
So if there, let's just, as a one scenario, if there were 4 priority items that came out of that we wanted to begin to move forward with implementation starting January of 2022, right? We get it September, October, we review, we accept, carve it out. I mean, I can see how that. There's nothing, to David's point, that says only Centrifuge can implement these components.
I think Centrifuge is an important player, especially in the action phase of this. I just have concerns exactly for the reasons you outlined about there's a missing link of accountability, because although they are our economic development arm, their director is accountable to 7 different people who are volunteers, where every other director that we hear from is accountable to Heidi, who's then accountable to us. So there's a much more, this is our vision, can staff please move that forward? And we don't have that relationship with Centrifuge, and so I'm concerned about the link, that piece of it, and I just don't know how it would work. But if we can paint a picture that would, then
And then shoot me later, not now, because it's not good form the first time we've been live. I could build a scenario where if you were to chunk out portions of that you would either RFP it or negotiate a scope of work with Centrifuge or any specific entity that could accomplish your goal. Once they've agreed, you then, in fact, we do have that level of accountability.
And I think that's a great idea, but then we're back to in-house, who's creating the RFP? Like, just am missing, where's the staff in-house person? And I'm okay with Bruce and David managing just the study piece, but once the study's complete and we have this to-do list, I would just really like to see a point person.
I don't disagree.
But yes, I agree with the no approving funding for projects until after the study is complete, and I would agree to approve the funding for the study.
So this is a fairly, I mean, we've gotten, this is a good conversation. Direction, let's, because we're pushing 6:45. Because we're not going to make, we won't make a motion, so there's no action to be taken. So is council comfortable then indicating to staff that, or to bring back, I don't know, would it be a resolution? I don't even know what we'd do, but to bring back something that would indicate a level of commitment of up to $75,000 for the scope of work. Well, that would come back. So, but fundamentally, the basis is in the scope of work. It may be finessed to reflect the conversation that would then count, that council could then act upon, right?
Yes.
And that would also incorporate, to David, and I'm hearing both that from Stacy, that council would be comfortable not not investing the additional $700,000 until such time as the report is completed and accepted. So we'd get those two things, and then that's not getting to your pieces yet, but I want to make sure, because I think these are the initial steps, and then I think some of the other conversation, even if we needed to do another special, we could begin to flesh out, you know.
Well, and now there's a very nice calendar of what's coming on upcoming agendas. I think we should just pencil in now, when this contract is scheduled to end, that we need to have the conversation about how we're going to oversee.
Yeah, so
this.
you're zooming in from Richland?
Let's bring it back, when the TIP report is completed, for a discussion of
So
the
that might be a more
report,
reasonable-
and then
The
also
other context of.
the, how do we spend, what are the sideboards on how we spend that money?
Yeah, I'm okay with the latter part. Councilmember Ingram brings up and refreshes memory on the issue, the as yet unresolved issue on how to reconcile the independence of Centrifuge with the city of Ellensburg. And I do think before we launch into the update of the TIP study, we just really need to have some consensus on what role are they expected to play. And we need to figure out how to manage that internally. It seems to me we should get a handle on that before we dive into the study. Because I think we're going to end up coming back to the same level of accountability on the implementation, right? We don't have to solve it. I'm just saying that.
So one of the conversations that we have had with the TIP consultants is that a portion of what they would develop would be, after doing the legwork and the community work, roles and responsibilities for economic development in the county.
For each of the partners.
For each of the partners. I mean, when you look at it, you've got the chamber doing certain things that would and truly have core competencies. We have our PDA, our Public Development Authority, Centrifuge, doing certain things with which they have core competencies and do well. You've got two active downtown associations and at least another in Roslyn, all of which are also doing certain kinds of economic development activities. You know, so a part of the conversation, David, to your point, rather than trying to flesh it out now, was I think it could be part of it. Well, it actually has been part of the ask of the consultants for them to have that conversation intimately with the chamber and with PDA, as well as the stakeholders who would provide the information. And I don't know if that addresses it immediately, but it feels again like, you know, to Nancy's questions, I'm not sure we're there to have the conversation.
I would agree with the mayor on that, and as the liaison, I think I've attended every centerfuse meeting and kept them up to date on like the incubator and what the happenings are. You know, they're very interested and that's really important to their work. And so I think the new liaison would just need to do the same, and it might make sense to have somebody that's going to the COG meetings, having these discussions, also then coordinating with the director at Centerfuse so that they're very looped in, even if it's not time for them to take action. I think looping them into that conversation and keeping them up to date on what's happening is critical.
So in terms of direction, again, I want to be sensitive to time and maybe give ourselves a 5-minute stretch before we launch. Do you have,
I believe we have sufficient information to move forward. And just know that the dollars, the check we received today for the incubator sale will sit comfortably in a fund and waiting for further direction. And we'll move forward with a mechanism to look at an economic development strategic plan that has Ellensburg in it.
around the collaborative, with the collaborative approach?
Absolutely.
So we have, I mean, so it's kind of, this was actually, again, it was a good conversation, I think, with an outcome that we still have the ability to impact and have further an additional conversation on. Do we want to just take a 10-minute before we kick off into regular?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do that. So the special session is adjourned at 6:50. Assuming we're not on bar time. And we'll come back at our regular 7 o'clock to do our regular session. Thank you. Not one yet, but I'm sure we'll get there.
Sure.